Well, I've got it as my next slide actually, so let's just start there. I am a biologist, and I did my master's and my bachelor's at the Carsten Center, and I actually specialized in bats on my master's. Here you see me collecting some guano, some bat poop in a cave in Mauritius, and I'm not wearing gloves. You see that? That's because I was just posing for the shoot. So of course I went and put on some gloves and collected the samples, right? So I'm specialized in bat poop, and now I'm a podcast and radio host. And then I interview all sorts of people. I've interviewed you, Catherine, and you, Carsten, and a lot of politicians. And so I'm sort of in the midst of all of this, of the politics and the biology and all the science. And then I write a bunch of columns for some Danish newspapers. And well, that's it, because you got to work 70 hours a week, right? And you asked me, Catherine, if I could answer what should we do to make people prioritize biodiversity, especially the politicians. And that is just $1 million question.
Yeah.
It's super difficult. I mean, we've all tried. I guess biologists have probably tried this for many, many years, decades, if not centuries. And it's super difficult. So, of course, I can't answer it, but I've got some suggestions. And the reason that we're even discussing this, and the reason that I'm saying that they're not taking it seriously now is I mean, if we look at the current trajectory, the bottom line, you can see where we're going, right? It's not as if we're in the midst of solving the biodiversity crisis. It's more of, well, it's actually going in a different direction. And to put it very shortly, there's something that I've noticed in all of the interviews and all of this, yes, the work I've been doing. And that is that we have this biodiversity crisis, and we know why, right? There's many, many reasons for it, but some of the main ones is like habitat destruction. You know, we destroy nature all the time, cut down rainforests to make something else, etc. Then it is invasive species that we've released, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose, and they're everywhere now, and they're just destroying all of the native habitats and all of the native species. Then it's pollution, we all know this, and overexploitation of species. For example, as of now, do you know how big a proportion of the global fish stocks are now overfished? Does any of you know? It is 37.7%. 40, it's going to be there in a couple of years, don't worry. I mean, if we're talking in football terms, if you fish down your fish stocks so much that they disappear and you're a fisherman, you're doing what in football terms you'd call a self-goal, right? You're basically ruining your own business. We're doing all these things, and that's why we have a biodiversity crisis. But there's one other reason that I can't help but see sometimes, and that is the bottom line. Because we can all agree that nature has got a lot of value. I'll get to this in a bit. But at the same time, it's a bit like every time the door closes and some of the grown-ups, the politicians and all of these lawmakers have to make the rules, etc., nature is just being tackled by the bottom line. And there's some stakeholders and someone earning money, putting pressure on nature. And that's just sort of money wins, right? And nature has value in this weird way that if you have a big piece of, let's say you have some pristine rainforest, it's very rare that you're going to be like, yeah, this rainforest made me rich. You know what I mean? I mean, of course, maybe you can do some ecotourism, but otherwise, you're probably going to earn more money if you make the rainforest into something else. But at the same time, we need all of these ecosystems to have a planet that we can thrive on. So without all of these ecosystems, we're gonna be fucked. But at the same time, we're not really making any money on having all of this biodiversity. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Nature has value in different ways. First of all, there's the ecosystem services. There's, we could talk about this for ages because there's tons of things that we get from all of these, from the ecosystems, if they're big and if they're intact and all of this. For example, they do carbon fixation. So if we have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the plants and the algae and all this, they can do something called photosynthesis. and then it's fixated, and it's a bit like carbon capture and storage, except that it works and it's free, right? And now we can see that we decimated so many of the ecosystems that the global carbon sink, like all of this fixation potential, it's sort of dropping. We could see last year that it's going in the wrong direction. So we basically had this big mechanism that could help with the climate regulation, and we are ruining it. This is just super duper stupid when you're in the midst of a climate crisis, right? And then I had to go to Ecuador last year to do some work, which was very hard for me as a biologist. I had to go there for 2 weeks, and I got paid, and everything was paid for. It was, oof. And I saw this a lot of times. Can you see what's going down on in the bottom of this picture? This is a mudslide. You see this all the time in Ecuador. It's not uncommon that you're driving on some roads, and then all of a sudden the road's just blocked. And it's because when you remove the rainforest, you don't have all of the plants holding the soil, and then it's just going to slip. You see it a lot in Ecuador, you see it in Colombia, Vietnam. In Papua New Guinea, you had a village with 2,000 people that was swallowed up recently. They all died because of mudslides, because they removed the rainforest. Like, this is a very important service that is done by these ecosystems. We have it in some, this is from Sichuan in China, where they use so many pesticides that they kill off all of the pollinators. So they don't have all the insects that pollinate the pear trees. So now we have people that have to do it by hand. I mean, if you have the insects doing it, it's free, right? If you have to do this, it's probably dangerous too. Then you have to pay people to pretend that they're bees, right? This is what happens when you destroy all of the ecosystems. It's not too thought through. And there's one more example, and this is an ecosystem service that's both good and bad, because some bats, they pollinate some plants in Mexico, some agaves, and you use these agaves to make tequila and mezcal. And so if the bats go extinct, we can shut down Gothersgade, right? This party street in Denmark. You have to keep that in mind. They should have the bat as their ambassador. And as you said, Karen, and I think you said it too, Carsten, we really like these ecosystems are just super valuable. Half the global GDP is dependent on them. So I'm not an economist, I'm just a biologist, but I'm thinking half of the global GDP depends on this. We should probably be a bit cautious, you know? So this is one sort of value that, biodiversity and these ecosystems have. Another one is that we really like it. I never met anyone who didn't like to be out in something that's just, green and natural and all this. We saw it a lot under COVID, I never met anyone under COVID who was like, yeah, I think I'm just going to go down to my basement to get some fresh air, right? Everyone went out to all of the parks, all of the nature areas in Denmark, because they just love that. It's good for everything. It's just nice for us, right? And we're willing to pay a lot to go to be out in nature. You can see this. If you see how much time people are willing to spend to drive to be out in a forest or something, well, time is money after all. So, that's another kind of value. And then there's the last one that's also pretty important, and that's just the intrinsic value, right? We have no right to destroy all of these, to kill off species. And it's a bit like this. There's this aspect of biodiversity where we can't really use it for anything. It's just there in its own right, a bit like art. And to sort of push it a little bit, I could say we could take Louvre, that's perfect French, by the way, and we could turn it into a parking lot. Small use, right? But we don't, because we sort of respect that even though art doesn't have a purpose, it's got a sort of a right to be there. There's something beautiful about it. It's difficult to put words on, but do you know what I mean? Good. So it seems like win-win to just, biodiversity, nature, all of this, let's just have more of it. Seems like win-win. But there are some stakeholders who prefer business as usual. And then I'm thinking, what do we do then? And I attended this, there was this thing that the KR Foundation held recently, and I came there and the board was asked after a panel discussion, someone asked them, what would you do to get rid of all of these crises, the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis? And they all said the same thing and mentioned the same word. And these were super clever people, so of course I listened. And they mentioned this: externalities. You know, when you have some sort of production, there's usually going to be some, well, cost or benefit caused by an economic actor that is not suffered or enjoyed by that same actor. For example, if you take the Danish agricultural sector, they have a lot of excess nitrogen, all of the fertilizers, all that goes into our coastal waters and just destroys them. So our fisheries have really suffered, right? That's an externality. And when you make soy in South America, you're going to have less of the Amazon. That's just super bad for just about everything, right? Burning fossil fuels, probably the worst one. It's just going to destabilize the climate and maybe ruin modern civilization. What are the costs of all this damage? And I think that we need to make the politicians focus more on these externalities. And when I'm out if I'm giving talks to businesses, etc., they usually don't like me saying this, but I think you should pay if you destroy nature or the climate. And we need to make the politicians realize this in some way. And it's super tricky because it's not popular for a politician to come out and say it. And the businesses are probably, and the big lobby organizations, they're not going to like it. And then the politicians, they probably aren't going to like it neither. So what we can do is that we can ask the lawmakers some questions. And this is also something, of course, I'm thinking because I interview them. So who's going to safeguard nature when they don't? Because they are the grown-ups, right? They make the rules. So if they want, who's going to do it? We often hear with the climate that we have this Danish expression that technology is going to overtake the challenge. And that's just super dangerous. It's basically just giving green lights to go ahead. But what about with biodiversity? If you lose a species, you can't just bring it back. It's lost. Some people are going to say, like colossal biosciences, that we can bring back the mammoth and the Tasmanian tiger and all this, and it's going to cost billions, and it's probably not going to work. But I'm like, it's not how it works. If we lose species, we lose them. What's the plan then? We can't just reverse, you know what I mean? We got to ask the politicians because it's their responsibility. We also have to ask them about if they've done any risk assessments, because when we look at tipping points and if we look at the planetary boundaries and we exceed them, it looks like it's going to be a catastrophe for society. It's going to be super hard for modern civilization. Have they done risk assessments? Have they looked at, if we continue on this current trajectory where we don't prioritize biodiversity, what could happen? And I don't know if they have, but we should probably ask. And then we should ask if they're willing to internalize the externalities of businesses. And if they don't do it, the bill is going to be passed on to the global south, etc. And who are they expecting to pay this? And I think the current trajectory that we're on is looking pretty risky. And if we looked at this as a business and someone said, yeah, we got this business and we're taking some very big risks, I think as an investor, you'd be like, you probably shouldn't. Isn't there a safer path, you know? And then if we look at Denmark, we're not exactly doing this in the greenest of ways. If we look at the global overshoot day and when we've used up our share of the natural resources, we're aiming for a first place. I mean, look at this. Even in March, we've used it up. This should be on New Year's Eve, you could accept if this day was there, but in March, it's just, yeah. So we need a new focus. And if we focus only on endangered species as some parts of conservation and there's been some focus where you're like, let's save this. It's just not gonna be able to stand. It's gonna be tackled by the bottom line. So I think we need to go a little bit up and sort of into the helicopter, if that makes sense, and say that biodiversity is also about ecosystems and we can't do without them. It just doesn't work. So we need to say that, yeah, it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have with all of these ecosystems, right? Maybe if we add some emphasis to this, we can make the politicians prioritize differently. I put in this because I don't know if it's going to work, but we can always hope so, right? That's that.
Super. Thanks very much, Alexander.